Hey everyone, in this screencast I am going to basically just step through this lab to practice with the box model, just so you can sort of see my process as I go through it. So in this lab I had you start with this HTML file. You can either right click and excuse me, and download it, or you can click to open, and then from here you can just do show page source, copy and paste. So I already have it open over here in my text editor. And the goal of this lab is you're starting with this HTML file, and we are going to create the CSS to get this file, this HTML file, which currently looks like this. Not much going on. We're going to add some CSS to get it to look like this. Obviously this is pretty terrible to look at, but this is just an exercise to get you a little more familiar with what the box model is and how to interact with it, and how to use it to start creating layouts using CSS. Okay, so back to the instructions. So basically all of the CSS specifications are outlined in this list right here. So I'm just going to step through each one. So sorry. The first one, target the outer wrapper ID and restrict the width, set a border, set a margin, and also set a font. So if we go look at my HTML, so this is a little similar to what I was using in the last screencast, where I was sort of introducing the box model. We've got all of our content here, and I've divided each section into its own div. And remember, the goal with that is to, or not the goal, but the reason for that is to have more flexibility. So this first one, all I have is an H1 in my header, but on a normal website you might have your logo, your main navigation, maybe a phone number, stuff like that. So you'd have each piece of content contained inside of a div, and that way you can target that container div, give it a background color, background image, whatever it is you want to do, and all of that content is contained inside of that container. So this just gives you more flexibility. So another example here is all of my content. I have an H2, I have a list, I have a paragraph. So I've contained all of those individual pieces of content in a container div. So I'm calling these container divs. You also hear them referred to as wrapper divs. And I'm literally using up here the name wrapper for my ID. That's just how I'm referring to these types of divs or these types of blocks. So they are containing multiple pieces of content, and I'm treating them as separate sections of my page or separate sections of the layout. So here's all of my content, and then with all of those pieces of content, I have put them all inside another div. So, you know, we've got a bunch of nesting happening here. So everything is contained inside one main container block or box, and I've called this a wrapper. I've given it a unique ID, and I've called it wrapper. So if we go look at what the final product is supposed to look like, the reason I put everything inside that wrapper div is you can see around everything I want to have this black border. So the only way to do that is to put everything inside one element and then target that element and give that element that black border. Okay, so let me go back to my specifications here, and I'm going to start adding in some styles. So the first thing is I'm going to start by adding this black border. So I'm going to target my wrapper div. And again, I've literally called it wrapper. I've given it an ID with the name of wrapper. So I'm going to target that ID. Sorry, by the way, for my whining dog in the background. So I'm going to target that wrapper div. I think the specifications said the border, so I'm going to give it the same type of border on all 4 sides. So I'm going to use the border shorthand. I think it said 8 pixels, solid and black. So I'm going to save, and I have my file open over here. Actually, this isn't it. Oh, that's not it either. Hold on. Box model. Okay, so there's my file. So I've put a border around my entire content. So this is, you know, again, sort of a starting point for taking our sort of styleless HTML and turning it into something that looks like a real web page. Okay, so the specifications, I need to add a border. I did that. I need to restrict the width. I need to set a defined width to 800 pixels. And I'm also going to set a margin, and I'm going to set a font. So let's start with width, 800 pixels, and a margin. It's set on all 4 sides. So I'm going to use the margin shorthand and give it 1 value. When you give it 1 value, it defaults to all 4 sides for that value. Let's see what this looks like here. Okay, so I have set without these 2, or actually, sorry, let's pull up the inspector. Sorry about that, I had a slight technical issue. Okay, so here's the inspector. So what I'm going to do here is, first of all, increase the font size a little bit so it's easier for you to see. So when I have that wrapper div selected in the inspector, I can see what styles have been applied to it. So I can quickly see, you know, this is what it looks like without the 800 pixel width, and then this is with it. And then same with margin. Obviously not too much of a difference there with that 5 pixel margin. Let's see. Oh, right. And then I'm also going to go ahead and set the font family to Arial with a sans serif backup. And that a thing to always remember with CSS is that nested elements inherit properties of their parent elements. So I've applied this font to the main wrapper div, and it's sort of trickled down. It's been inherited by all of its children, or all of the elements that are contained inside of it. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is a couple things with the header. I'm going to target the header container and give it a border, and I'm also going to target the H1 itself and set some font properties. So I'm going to first target not the H1, but its parent container. So that is this div that I've given an ID of called header. And I'm going to give it just a bottom border, by the way, 6 pixels, double, red. This double is one of those predefined styles that borders have. Remember, there are just a handful: solid, dashed, dotted, double, I think groove, maybe a couple others. This is the size I'm giving it, and then the color. And instead of using a hexadecimal value, I'm just using one of those color keywords. And again, I'm only targeting the bottom border. So when you use border-bottom or border-left, for example, you only give it one value here because you're only targeting one side. So let's save that, and we can see what that does. I'm also going to target the H1 and give it, I think it was a font size of 40 pixels and a margin. Remember, the margin is the space outside of the border. So you have your content, you have the padding, then you have your border or the edge, and then the space outside on all sides is the margin. So we can see that this header is kind of smushed up against the wrapper border. So that black is the border of the wrapper div, not the header div. So I want to give a little breathing room there between my header div and the container div. So we can highlight these things down here to see what I'm talking about. So on my H1, I've given a margin. The white part is the actual content, the orange is the margin. Without the margin, it smushes up against the side. So that just gives it a little bit of breathing room. Okay, next here I'm going to target my content ID. So remember, I have this div, my content div. It contains an H2, it contains a list, it contains a paragraph. So I'm going to target that and also set a margin so that all of this stuff isn't smushed up against the side. So my ID is called content. I target it in CSS using the ID syntax, which is hashtag and then name. Margin, I'm going to do same value all four sides, so 20 pixels. And now I've got a little bit of breathing room. Next thing is I'm going to target my list. I'm going to give it a background color, a border, and also set some padding, and also modify its width as well. So if you go down here, so this list right here, ultimately I want it to look like this. So I'm going to target that list. So I could, if I needed, I could give this list an ID or a class if there were other lists in my content and I didn't want to modify those. I only wanted to target this one. I also could use a contextual selector. So I could say within my content div, target the unordered list and give it a border, same style on all four sides. So border, shorthand, 4 pixels, dotted style, and then we'll just use a green color. I'm going to use a background color property and use the magenta keyword, color keyword. Let's just see what that looks like. So again, I've used a contextual selector, and I'm doing that. I don't have that much content in this example, but theoretically I could have other unordered lists on this page. So to be specific in what I'm targeting with these styles, I can say only the unordered list inside my content div. Or, like I said, I could also give this a class name if I wanted, or if I know I only want to use these styles on this particular div, like it's unique, then I could also give it an ID if I wanted. So I'm going to hold off on those and just use this contextual selector. So I've got my border, I've got my background color. Last two things, I'm going to restrict the width. I think it was to 100 pixels, and I want to add some padding. So again, padding is the space between the content, so that would be these list items, and the edge, which is the border. So unordered lists by default already have some padding on the left here, you can see, but I want to put some breathing room on the top and bottom. So I'm going to say padding 40 pixels, and I'm going to set the width to 100 pixels. So I'm almost there. Last couple of things here. I'm going to target that paragraph that I've put in its own container div, restrict the width, set a margin. I'm going to set different padding on the sides, so right and left versus the top and bottom. Background color and a border. So I'm going to target this section right here. I'm going to go ahead and use that contextual selector. So within the content div, there's another div with an ID called section 1. You got to make sure that everything is that you're referencing everything properly. If I put a space there, that wouldn't work. If I use the capital S, that wouldn't work. So everything needs to be consistent. So first I'm going to set a width, 500 pixels, and a background. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, got some stuff going on. I'm going to set a border. So this was going to be same style on all four sides, 2 pixels, dashed, different style, green. All right, and then you'll notice that this is kind of bumped out a little bit. So this, remember, the space outside of the border between all other elements, that's the margin. So I'm going to achieve that, I'm going to set a margin. Remember all these values I've given you in the specifications. In a normal world, you'd probably play around with the values to figure out what you like. So that bumps it out a little bit. The other thing is there's space between the content and the border. So again, this is padding. The space outside is margin. The space inside is padding. The specifications said right and left is 40, top and bottom is 20. So I have some options. I could set each individual one like this, padding right, padding top, and padding bottom. Perfectly fine to do it that way. Now I've got my padding, or you can save a little space and use the padding shorthand. First value is going to be the top, and then it goes clockwise, or you can just do 2 values. The first one's going to be top and bottom, second one is going to be right and left. So that gives me same thing as typing them all out individually. Okay, last thing here is the footer. I'm going to set the color to white, and oh, actually I think I forgot one thing. So with the paragraph here, where the section text, I was also going to set the text to italic. Okay, last thing is I'm going to target my footer, this thing down here, given it an ID called footer. I want to let's see, so we're going to give it a background color, a top border, and because we've given it a dark background color, we also need to change the text color to white so that it's legible. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the background color. And I'm using purple. I'm going to set the text color to white. Remember, text color is just color. And I'm only targeting the top border. I'm going to make it 3 pixels, the dashed style, white color. Let's see what it looks like. Oops, typo, that was my problem. So background color. Okay, so that looks good. Obviously I need to center this text here. So if you remember, we have the text align property. So this centers the content within a box. So I'm going to do text align center. I'm going to add a little padding so that my text has a little breathing room. And I think that's about it. So here's the final version I was going toward and what I just typed. So more or less, I think I got a couple values wrong there, but hopefully you get the idea. Again, this is just more practice with the box model. The box model is the thing that allows us to create CSS layouts. Every piece of content that we tag is its own box. That box can have a width, it can have a height, it can have a border. On the inside of the border is the padding, on the outside of the border is the margin. And it's what allows us, again, to create multi-column layouts, to create menus, to create sections, defined sections of our page. Yeah, so this is practice with the box model. Again, this layout is pretty terrible, but this is just an exercise to get you a little more familiar with playing around with margins, padding, borders, background colors. Yeah, so that's it. Let me know if you have any questions or if you noticed anything that I did wrong or have a question about. All right, thanks.